Hi, Namaste, Hare Krishna. My name is Sahaila, and today I wanted to share why, as a devotee of Krishna or as a Hindu person, why I do not and cannot support certain ideologies like CRT or critical race theory or certain related Marxian ideologies or certain analytical frameworks. So I guess I want to keep this video as short and to the point as possible because it's a very complex subject, and I already know I'm going to probably talk much longer than I anticipated. But basically, as a Hindu, I believe that actually that I'm not a Hindu and that I'm not this body, and that the I is beyond this physical manifestation of just these atoms, this body, right? So there's this concept in Hinduism called the Atman, and that is the self. And it's not that we are humans, having a spiritual experience, but we're like spiritual eternal beings who happen to be having a human experience. So the real I, the real self, with the big I within self with the big S, that is transcendental to this material world. That is everlasting. It is Satchitananda, which is eternal conscious bliss. So it's a very beautiful concept. So this concept of I goes beyond what color body we have, what gender body we have, what religion we practice, what ideology we go after, whatever identity that we define ourselves with or confine ourselves with. All of these identities ultimately are secondary, and they are always secondary to the Atman, to the underlying self, to the spirit soul, right? So whether, some of my identities, because if we're going to talk about critical race theory, we have to talk about material designations and material identities and intersectional identities, if you've heard of that before. So some of my intersectional identities, I happen to be Hindu, like is said in the title of the video. I also happen to be a transsexual person. I'm a mixed race person. So I have these different intersecting identities, right? And from the perspective of CRT or similar theories like queer theory or through a cultural Marxist lens or this critical consciousness, they always want to be putting the focus on that material designation. But from the Hindu perspective, again, whatever identity, whatever designation that we have, and there's so many limitless varieties and variegatedness of manifestations in this material world. There's no end to it. So we can't focus on all of these little things, and that will never help us actually get closer to self-realization, who we actually are. Many of these things are actually leading us farther away from who we are. So I just wanted to read a quote here, because this kind of is what I feel compelled to do in my life as a devotee of Krishna. So if you don't know, Krishna is, many would say God. I think he happens to be much more, and he's lovely. But anyways, he's many things to different people, but for me in my life, I try to follow his teachings, which can be found in many different scriptures, but the main one is called Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam. You can find different information about Krishna, stories about him, and the teachings directly from him. So Bhagavad Gita is actually the song of Krishna. And I feel compelled to follow his words. And this is what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. Vidya vinaya sampanne brahmane gavihastini shunni chaiva svapake cha panditas samadharshinaha. So that means that the truly learned sage with the eyes of divine knowledge, so not just this material knowledge or material sight, they see with equal vision a Brahmin or a priest, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and even a dog eater. So let me read that one more time. The truly learned sage, with the eyes of divine knowledge, see with equal vision a Brahman, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater. So what Krishna is saying here is that regardless of the bodily manifestation that we see, whether it happens to be a very priestly person or a very saintly person or someone that we would deem very learned or very scholarly, or whether it's a cow or whether it's an elephant, or even if it's a dog or a dog eater, which, you know, especially in the West today, people are quite horrified by the idea of eating a dog. But what Krishna is saying, if you have the divine knowledge and you have divine sight, that you won't be looking and observing from the perspective of only the superficial, which is the bodily manifestation. You are seeing past that, and you're seeing the Atman, which is the self, which is the conscious, you know, living force that is propelling all of this cosmos, all of the humanity, and all of the different living entities and the sentient beings. So we as Hindus and we as devotees, aspiring devotees of Krishna, we are called to forego this constant focus on defining and confining and addressing people or things based on all of this material manifestation. So instead of seeing an American body or a male body, female body, or fat or skinny, young or old, we're looking past that to the self, to the Atman. And there's another beautiful quote here by a very saintly teacher. His name was Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda. You may have heard of him. This is a very beautiful quote. And I also feel compelled by his words and by his injunctions. Like, this is my prerogative to see people and treat people in this manner and to act in this way. So Swami Vivekananda, he says, advance like a hero and do not be thwarted by anything. How many days will this body last with its happiness and misery? When you have the human body, then rouse the Atman within and say, I have reached the state of fearlessness. And then, as long as the body endures, speak unto others this message of fearlessness. Thou art that. Okay? Thou art that. Meditate on that. Thou art that. Arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached. So what Vivekananda is saying here is, don't play around in this material consciousness all the time, hyper-focusing on the body and all of these different material manifestations of it. See the self within. And then he says, when you stand upon the Atman, then, or when you're coming from the perspective not of mental speculation and judgment on someone's race or gender, but you're working from the space of the self, which within you is the same as within someone else. That is the spark of divinity of God. He says, when you stand upon the Atman, then only can we truly love the world. Take a very, very high stand, knowing our universal nature. We must look with perfect calmness upon all the panorama of the world. So the whole panorama, like I was saying, there's no end to all of the variegatedness and different manifestations in the material world. Tall people, skinny people, fat people, people with disabilities, different races, different colors, different sexualities, so many different things. But look upon that with calmness. Don't worry about all of this variegatedness, all of this diversity. It's nice, it's beautiful, but with calmness look upon it and know that behind that, the operating force, the foundation there, the spiritual foundation, is Atman, is Brahman, is consciousness. Consciousness, bliss, and eternally existing. Very beautiful idea. So I don't expect any of you to believe that. But I find this very nice, very convincing, and I've been following Hinduism for almost 15 years now. And that is the lifestyle that I live. And when I am in a workplace and I'm speaking out because I was forced into over a month-long program for Black Lives Matter and diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings at one of my former jobs. And it was terrible. It was awful. And I'm convinced that it is an evil, it's an evil ideology. And I was constantly being forced to see people based on their skin color, to see people based on their sexuality, their gender identity, all of these different things. And it was so exhausting, because then what you are asked to do is to treat people differently based on their identities, which to me is quite offensive and raises a lot of red flags. Like in my head, like that's a lot of red, flashing lights and red flags waving that this is not okay, because I go by, I don't even say treat all people by the content of the character. Hinduism says go even further. See all the sentient beings and all the manifestation in this whole cosmic universe. Like, wow, see behind that the manifestation of divinity and God there. And when you are practicing Krishna consciousness, when you're trying to see Krishna everywhere and God everywhere, and these people are trying to say, no, don't look at the core, don't look at the Krishna, which is this beautiful, everlasting, spiritual, transcendental kind of space. They're saying, focus on all of these outer superficial manifestations, which again, there's nothing wrong with all of this diversity. That's beautiful. But to hyper focus on these outer manifestations that people have no control over seems, I don't know, it just doesn't seem right to me. It's just off, and it doesn't ever help anyone. So I've been told, and now the CRT theology seems to be promoting now the idea of positive discrimination, which means for equity, for everyone to end up the same, that we actually have to discriminate, but in a positive manner, or what they label as positive, in order to make up for inequities for marginalized or oppressed groups. So if you have someone, let me back up here. So each identity that you could have or be categorized by has its own way of mapping out, who's marginalized, who's oppressed, and who's the privileged, and who's the one, with the power. So today, what we're seeing, especially with the CRT movement and with a lot of far left radical movements in my eyes, radical in my eyes anyways, is this idea of intersectionality, which in some instances I can understand that it could be useful, but what I see is really dangerous now is that we're saying, okay, so you have to discriminate different people differently based on their different identities, and people aren't nuanced, complex individuals, but instead now they're avatars of their collective identities. So in order for you to know how to interact with someone, how to speak to someone, how to react to someone, how to receive someone, you're going to have to map them out in your head on an intersectional map to find out what their identity is. This can be very exhausting and ridiculous depending on how far you go, because now the biggest obsession is race, right? So we have white at the top, right? And then people will say Asian probably, and then Latino, and then black. Okay, so white people are the most privileged at the top, and then black at the bottom. They are the most oppressed and marginalized. Okay, so that's one map. Then we take sexuality. Okay, we have gays and lesbians and bisexuals, and then 5,000 other sexual orientations, and they are the oppressed, they are the marginalized. And then you have straight people, which they hold the privilege, and they're the ones leading the heteronormative dominant culture. All right, so that's the second map. We've got class. Most people don't focus on this anymore. That's more, I feel like everyone's kind of forgotten about class ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. It's become, maybe out of fashion. It's more fashionable to focus on race and sexuality and gender identity, but class, you have the bourgeoisie, and you have the upper classes, the people that have all the money, and then you have the proletariat, and you have the working class, and the have-nots and the peasants. And then again, like gender identity, you'll have cisgender people or non-transgender people, which are oppressors and hold power over transsexual or transgender people like me, and I'm supposed to be marginalized and oppressed and a victim, which that doesn't make me feel very nice. So you can see that there's no end to intersectionality, because again, people will just keep choosing more categories to add on to the intersectional lens. So now we're seeing more of critical, I think it's a critical size theory. I've heard it referred to as before. It's basically looking at like things like fat phobia, skinny privilege. So skinny, beautiful people, they have pretty privilege, and skinny privilege, and fat people are oppressed and marginalized and are hated because of their size. There are even other like really weird categories, things like otherkin, that are coming out now. And I will admit that's very much, you know, on the fringe. But I have run into people like this in real life when I used to live in Oregon. But they don't even identify as human. You know, like, oh, I identify as an animal or an alien or like a cloud. It's very strange. So people just keep adding, because if we determine the way that we treat each other based on a cumulative like oppression scale, obviously if people want to be treated better, they're going to try and make their score much higher, that weight much heavier, so that they'll be met with more admiration, respect, and dignity, which they should be treated with dignity and respect and with integrity anyways. We should be treating everybody that way anyways. Unless, you know, they come after you and trying to attack you, you know, defend yourself. But if no one is coming after you, if no one's infringing upon your rights or enforcing the lifestyle on you, then, you know, I think we should all be humble and take a respectful approach towards one another. Yeah, so I'm trying to think, let's see, we're at 17 minutes, so this is getting pretty long. I'm not sure if there's much more I want to say at this point, except for, I guess I wanted to speak out because I wouldn't be speaking out had I not had this ideology or this analytical lens or framework forced upon me. And now it's not only me, it's being forced upon everybody as a new kind of secular orthodoxy. And I don't want any orthodoxy forced on anyone. I don't want to force my Hinduism on anyone. I grew up in a very culty kind of Christian environment where everything was forced on me. So the last thing I want is to force rules and regulations and orthodoxy from an ideology or religion on somebody. And to me, critical race theory, cultural Marxism is 100% a religion. And in most of its manifestations, I'm quite confident in saying that it's a cult. Quite confident. When I grew up in my fundamentalist Christian environment, people were really crazy. And it was very dreadful. And it disturbs me because the people that I see today, they can even be atheist, but the hardcore proponents of leftism, Marxism, and critical race theory, they act and behave exactly the same as the fundamentalist evangelical culty people that I grew up with. It's so crazy. So they may not be Christians and they may not believe in God, they may not be theists, but it's a religion. I think they're practicing it as a religion. It's filling that role. I think this ideology and carrying it out gives them a sort of religious experience. If you listen to some of these proponents of critical race theory, like Robin DiAngelo, Ibram X. Kendi, or even just listening to some diversity and equity trainers, the way that they talk, it's like very spiritual for them, very metaphysical, esoteric. None of it is like, there's no proof for any of it. None of it is based in reality. It's all theoretical, mental speculation. So personally, I have no problem or issue if someone else wants to follow that ideology and live by whatever values that entails. But I cannot stand that it's being forced on people in the workplace. It's being forced onto children in our schools. It's being, it's just manifesting everywhere, and it's a very divisive system, very divisive theology or ideology, rather. Not a very good paradigm for looking at the world. And we're at 20 minutes now, so I'm going to wrap it up. Basically, thank you for watching this video. And yeah, when looking at other people, when treating, interacting with other people, I would say just try and see the manifestation of Krishna, the manifestation of God within that person. See that person within the heart of the other person. Don't see the body, don't see the gender, don't see the sexuality, don't focus on any of those things. When you interact with life, may your prerogative not be to, how can I find racism in the situation? How can I find the manifestation of heterophobia or, sexism? Because CRT says it's not a matter of if racism happened, it's a matter of how it happened and how it manifested itself. And many of the far leftists are saying it's the same with transphobia, with homophobia, with classism, with misogyny, that that there's no way of getting beyond that. There is no if it happened. It did happen, and you have to find out how it happened. That's not a good way to live your life. I very much suggest, recommend, when you go into different situations and dealing with life, to treat it with respect and dignity. Life, and especially people, we're very complex, very nuanced people. We're very sacred things, humans. It's terrible the way we treat each other. But look for the manifestation of divinity there, in the person. It's much better. Look for that in people instead of all of the outside coverings. And try and interact with people from that platform instead of all the outside superficial stuff. I hope that makes sense. In the end, I just wanted to make this video to feel a little bit better, get this off my chest, and maybe it is informative for other people. And I hope it makes sense that, as a Hindu, I am called to see people a certain way, to treat people a certain way. And I don't care if it's CRT or diversity and equity and inclusion. I don't care what you call it. I'm not going to try and see people for anything else than a manifestation of God. To me, anything else really cheapens the value of existence and life that we have here. So thank you for listening. This is a 23-minute video here. It's really long, so if you made it this far, thank you very much. And till next time, Hare Krishna. Please take care and stay the heck away from critical consciousness. Practice Krishna consciousness instead. Bye-bye.